Welcome to Real Estate and Murder, a podcast about real estate and murder.
I am Amy Brockbank.
And I am Sarah Brager. We are both licensed real estate agents in the state of Utah who have a common fascination with true crime.
We are here to tell you stories of murder amongst the real estate community. It might be an agent, it might be a client, it might be an undetected serial killer.
When it comes to real estate crimes, some are predators and some are prey.
We just want to issue a trigger warning. The content of these cases can be difficult to hear from time to time, and please listen with care.
Hi, Amy.
Hey, Sarah.
And everybody, welcome back to Real Estate and Murder.
It's been a hot minute since we've been in the studio.
Yeah, it feels like it has. This month has flown.
Yeah.
6 weeks? I don't know. Time has flown. But we're back recording, so yay.
So exciting.
So, Amy, tell me what you did in real estate this week.
Oh, gosh. It's actually been really busy. Got some clients pre-approved, showing houses. The market's picking up a little bit, I feel like. It kind of stalled out when interest rates went they went down and then they went back up, and I think people kind of froze, but...
Yeah, as always.
Yeah, I mean, rightfully so, obviously.
Of course.
When the market's uncertain, I think people become uncertain too, so...
They absolutely do, which we have to adapt to in real estate.
Yeah.
We really do. So it is busy. And the market is picking up because I also met with several buyers this week to help them get pre-approved. So, and that's a good sign for us. That's an indicator that buyers are getting their feet wet and they're getting back out there. So that's good.
Huh.
Okay, good. It has been a busy week. And here we are on Saturday.
We never record on Saturdays.
But I kind of like it. Like I had enough time to put some things together. But in real estate, usually we're showing homes and helping clients on Saturdays. So we both had some time this afternoon to fit it in, and here we are.
Here we are.
All right. Oh, Amy, also this week, you and I, as a part of the group that you and I founded, we hosted a CE training for other agents to come to.
We did.
And it was an awesome class. So if you're not in real estate, I guess I should say a CE class is a continuing education class. And every 2 years, an agent in the state of Utah has to renew their license. And as a part of that, you're required to have a certain amount of CE credits.
Yes.
And so we hosted a class with an amazing lawyer who came in and taught us and reminded us also of some excellent things about the real estate field and real estate documents.
Well, and it was actually Justin Stratton's company that came in.
Yes.
Which of our listeners have been listening to us, he was the escrow officer that came on for
Chuck Morgan, one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah.
Yep, Justin Stratton was on that episode, and he was fantastic. So, but that was really fun. That was the first one that we formally hosted, and it was such an excellent class. We had a great turnout. It was a good time.
And we didn't scare him because he told me he wanted to come back.
I can't wait to have him back on the podcast. Although we're going to have to go find another story that ties in. Or maybe not. Maybe he'll just come talk to us.
I mean, he's so scandalous in his knowledge, because he's seeing fraud every day.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's wild what he comes across.
Ooh, I just thought of it. I know exactly what case to bring back on now that you said
good.
Fraud every day. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we had a busy week because we both worked with new buyers this week and hosted that CE. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
Well, today, everybody, we are going to be talking about the death of Crystal McDowell, who was a realtor in Baytown, Texas. And Amy, actually, there's something kind of a little ironic about the timing of this episode that we're recording, because, we both work and I work on scheduling out the subjects, and we try to stick to them per a schedule, but, our lives come up. But this was on the schedule quite a while ago. We actually had to bump it and move it around, but
on our list to record in July.
Yeah, and we just have to keep moving things around. And anyway, this case actually takes place, and Crystal McDowell disappeared right in the midst of a very, very powerful hurricane back in 2017 called Hurricane Harvey. Yeah. And right now, as we are, in the first and second weeks of October of 2024, there are actually some really two large and devastating, powerful hurricanes that have been occurring, and that would be Hurricane Helene and Milton down around, the coast of Florida and into the Bahamas and Carolinas. Yeah. And they're wrecking havoc. So I find the timing to be ironic, although of course coincidental. But, we did just want to say and put it out there that, we are so sorry and feel horrible for the families that are being impacted, for the devastation that's been had, and sending all of like the love and good vibes, everything you can possibly send over to people that are suffering right now. And what did you want to say about it?
Yeah, I want to say that as a community, even though we're in Utah, like there's, ways to donate and different things to help the impacted families. But I really love watching on social media fellow people in our industry. There's been several people that I follow that are in North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, that are in real estate, that are trying to get supplies and things to the areas that they aren't actually in, but they are neighbors, they're community members, they are impacted. And I find that so moving and I'm sure every industry kind of does that, but because of who we follow and who we kind of, the industry that we're involved in directly, we see the impact that real estate agents can have bettering their community and helping their neighbors and showing up in times of crisis and in good times too. So, to me, that's a great reminder about what we can do together as a nation and as a community and as a group. So,
yeah, that was beautiful. That was so eloquent. And our hearts go out to the families and the people down there that are experiencing that. It has to be so stressful and traumatic. I just can't imagine.
I mean, I follow several people. I follow a pediatrician out of Florida.
I know. I always laugh when you say that. It just cracks me up. Okay.
But anyway, she's so calm, but the amount of stress, I don't know if you've seen videos of people hunkering down and just being like, oh, this is what, just another Tuesday because we live in Florida. They're built different down there.
They really are.
They're so calm. And there was a guy sitting in a kayak in his living room just floating. His house is flooded. Oh my gosh. And he's like, yeah, the water's coming in. I'm like, no, there's bubbles in the water. The water is dark. You've got sharks now living inside your house.
Could be an alligator in there.
100%. You see people opening the door and there's
so true.
Big old monster alligator that's just moved into the house. No, I could not. But
there must just come, I would assume, this moment of acceptance where you're kind of like, I can't do anything about this right now.
So.
But that is a skill set.
It's remarkable to me to see people just giving information and being so calm and just being like, this is our life. And I'm freaking out for them. But yeah, no, it's amazing. Everybody's amazing.
They are. All right, so that's what's going on currently. But Hurricane Harvey was also a very devastating storm, Amy. So how about I tell you a little bit about Hurricane Harvey?
Yeah, let's hear it.
And I'm actually going to tell you about this storm because if you understand the gravity of it, you can really understand the timing of which Crystal disappeared and why kind of the discovery of Crystal was so delayed, if you will. I mean, to be honest, it was quicker than some are, but I'm just saying, if you understand kind of the timeline of the story. So I actually went on the National Weather Service website to just pull some details. I figured that was a good source to go to for kind of the really factual stuff. So Hurricane Harvey started as a tropical wave off of the African coast on Sunday, August 13th, and tracked westward across the Atlantic. And on August 17th, it became a tropical storm.
And we're talking about the year 2004, right?
No. Are you talking about the year 2004?
Yeah, that's when Hurricane Harvey was. Or 2017? When was that?
2017.
We'll have editor out.
All of our notes. No, we're not editing that. You're keeping that in. You are keeping that in. There have been a few episodes where something has just rolled off your tongue, like the wrong name or something, and I'll ask you about it. You're like, no, that's right. And then you and I lock eyes like, who's right? Crystal McDowell went missing in 2017.
Yeah.
Now you're scaring me.
I know. It's okay.
Is it okay?
Oh, it became the first category storm since 2004. That's
There
where
it
my
is.
nose. That's why I was like, wait, what year are we talking about? Okay, since 2004 to hit the U.S.
I love it when you look at me like I'm crazy like
No,
that.
you're good.
Okay. So, at that point, it hit the Caribbean Sea, and then Harvey became a disorganized storm, which means it kind of like split. And Harvey was then downgraded to a tropical wave, which entered into the Gulf of Mexico. So anyway, I'm just saying all this because I find it fascinating as we're experiencing this in the news a lot currently to kind of like watch the tracking of these storms, because there are a lot of them that do originate off of the coast of Africa and move west, which I just didn't know that before.
Yeah.
You kind of watch the trackers on the news and the weather stations and stuff, but this just gave some very specific details. So anyway, it starts to pick up, and then Harvey made landfall along the Texas coast around 10 p.m. on August 25th as a Category 4 storm. And again, I learned recently, Category 5 is the maximum, which I thought, is it earthquakes that go up to 7?
I don't know.
I believe it is, but
Weather, according to Sarah.
I know.
We're going to
Storms
add this.
by Years and Data, a podcast by Amy and Sarah.
Nope, just
We're fine. I'm just saying I was surprised this week to maybe just be reminded. We'll call it that. So meaning a Category 4, if you like just look at the rating of a 4, it seems like, oh, that's pretty bad. Well, yeah, especially if 5 is the maximum category.
Yeah. And we were in Florida a couple years ago when there was a Category 1 that hit, and we were like talking, and a tornado warnings, and we were like, oh, maybe we need to hide out in our bathtub. Like, there was like 4 of us that was gonna like.
We took a picture.
No, we were going to. I don't think we actually got in the bathtub.
We didn't. But our beloved friend and realtor that was with us, he came in on a later flight, and he was like driving, or he was riding in an Uber. And he had to come like 2 hours to get to us in Orlando. And he was like, it was death the whole way. He was like, I was skating on water. And yeah, that was a Hurricane 1. And we were in Orlando, which is inland.
Yeah.
Which ironically, let's just add to the irony here. Some of our same friends are there right now. And I'm going there in a couple days.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the hurricane follows me or what. But whenever I go to Orlando, there's a tropical
I was
storm.
saying, like, we were nervous, and our friends that were with us, they're buying water, they're stockpiling like supplies and all of this stuff. They had brought applesauce in suitcases,
bags of applesauce, and me and Amy are just willy nilly, like, we're ready to take on deck.
But that was like a Category 1. Like we were not equipped for a Category 4. Or
we were certainly not.
No.
We were not. That whole trip could be a episode of its own. Okay. So Harvey is picking up and moving along the Texas coast. It makes landfall primarily between the 25th of August and the 26th. And then the rains just kind of continue for a couple days after that. So the morning of the 27th of August saw additional heavy storms move in. And then the center of Harvey slowly moved out and back offshore, although heavy rainfall continued throughout the 29th and the 30th of August. And I'm bringing up all these dates because, again, I find it fascinating as we're watching it currently happen. This storm really lasted 5 days. Imagine just kind of being in sort of like fight or flight or panic mode for a week, for 10 days. Again, like our hearts just go out to these people that experience this because we live in Utah and we get bad snowstorms. But I mean, I think twice in my 25 years of living here, there's been a very small tornado that was honestly probably an accident. Remember those ones?
In Salt Lake that ripped off the roof.
Yeah. And again, like we get snowstorms, but there's not the devastation or the threat of devastation on a regular basis like there can be on these coastal cities.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, earthquakes happen, but
sure.
No,
they definitely do, but we still haven't, at least in our lifetime here, experienced one of this that would match this magnitude.
And the hurricane, I mean, you said it lasted 5 days. Like, that's just 5 days of bad weather.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the aftermath of, some of these families are displaced either forever or, like, it takes a year for them to rebuild back their house. So their lives are uprooted for
Absolutely.
a really long time.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it was a cataclysmic hurricane during this time for certain areas, as well as what's happening now in the East Coast.
So Baytown, Texas, where our story takes place, which is a coastal city, received 42 inches of rainfall at its highest.
Yeah, it's just insane.
Like, that's a few feet.
Yeah, that's probably more than Utah receives all year.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of the aftermath of the storm, Hurricane Harvey left 211,000 people without electricity. The storm took 107 lives and cost over $190 billion of damage. Billion dollars of damage.
Yeah.
So it was an astronomical storm. So that's a little bit about Hurricane Harvey. And again, very important to the timeline of this story. So that's why I wanted to go over it. So there's Harvey. All right. Well, Amy, why don't we tell our listeners a little bit more about Baytown, Texas? So we have on all of our, or most of our previous episodes, I guess, given our listeners the local real estate statistics, like market statistics, for our current day and time. So that storm was in 2017 and Crystal disappeared in 2017 or 2004, according to Amy. But in 2017, however, we're going to give you some Baytown, Texas statistics for current day market. So take it away.
So Baytown, for those of you who aren't familiar with Texas or Baytown, it's about 20 miles away from Houston, so it's almost like a suburb. A lot of people, it's a working class community. A lot of people commute into Houston for work. I guess middle class, not, but anyway, so that's how it was in 2017.
Okay.
It was classified as a middle class. But according to realtor.com, the median price for a home right now in 2024 is $279,000.
Oh my.
The median days on market, which means average, right? Our listeners, if they've, as we talk about median, is about 45 days on market. And the listing home price per square foot is about 145, if you track that. Now, another site on Redfin, they had a little bit more information on the Baytown area, and they have sales to list price. So if you're looking into a home and you see a contract price that's like listed for X amount of dollars, everybody always asks, is there room to negotiate or whatever? In Baytown right now, the sales to list price is 95.4%. So there's about a 4.6% of negotiation that goes on with the current houses that are for sale.
There's a 94% negotiation?
4.6.
Oh, I heard 94. We were both off our game. Okay, we can't let this long go between recordings because I was like, wait a second, did she just say 94? Okay.
4.6.
Keep going. We're both like, are you okay? We're fine.
But there are about 17.8% of homes that are sold above list price. So those are going to be the homes that are like, we call them Pinterest homes here. Hopefully our audience knows what we're talking about. The ones that are like decked out and staged and look
modernized,
trendy. And yeah, those homes that everybody's kind of like, oh, I'm going to move in, not have to do any work to, whatever.
Yep.
And then homes with price drops are 39%. And I bring that up because of the market. Every area is holding different market. Right now in Utah, we're seeing a lot of inventory on the market. And so where a few years ago it was a seller's market, meaning that the buyers were really having to struggle to get into a house. There was multiple buyers per home that they were kind of trying to compete against with. And where you have homes that are having almost a 40% drop in home prices, like that just kind of shows you like the shift of the market in a way that is not as high of a seller's market.
40% drop in prices?
Homes with a price drop is 40%, 39%.
Okay, so of the homes sold in this time where the statistic was taken, 40% of those homes had to price drop.
Yes.
And we know because the statistic you gave just before that the list to sell price is about 95%, you said, which tells us that of those homes sold, again, in our statistic range, the homeowners received an average of 95% of their original list price, of their asking price, right? And so about 40% of those homes had to drop below their original list price.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just goes to show that the buyers in Baytown, according to the statistics, now we're not agents there, so you can talk to your local professionals, but that they are able to negotiate, and then the sellers can kind of look at this data and say, like, okay, if I ask this much, I'll most likely get this much for the house.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and we can't even begin to comment or wrap our minds around other real estate markets, but it does sound pretty comparable to Utah's market right now, with the exception of the average list price.
Yeah.
Which, if the average or the median price that you said is $279,
yeah,
I mean, you struggle to find a condo here in Utah County, Salt Lake County primarily, which is where we primarily operate, although you and I have done real estate all over the state of Utah. Mm-hmm. It's tough to find like a very, very starter property.
Yeah.
Anyway.
75. So most people that live in Baytown stay in Baytown. But if home buyers are searching to move out of Baytown, they're moving to Denver, Austin, and San Antonio. About 75% of those that are relocating are moving out to those areas.
Yeah.
That are moving out of state. And then those that are moving into the area are Los Angeles, New York, and Washington, D.C. But most of the home buyers that are searching are staying within the Baytown area.
Oh,
so
very interesting.
Anyway, there you have it.
All right, so there's Baytown.
Yeah.
Well, let's move into then the life of Crystal McDowell. So, unfortunately, the topic of the episodes that we cover are about a death, right? But of course, we want to share about their life. So, this case is a little bit unique in the sense, I find it to be a little unique in the sense that Crystal, had a pretty tumultuous life not up until her death, but at times in her life, right? And that's not necessarily unique, but the fact that we know that much about kind of the ups and downs up until that point, we've got actually like a lot of information about it.
Yeah.
Which we don't always have. So, Amy, you're going to tell us a little bit about Crystal's life and her upbringing, right?
Yeah. So Crystal Ann was born on October 26, 1979. Her mom was Pamela and her father was Anthony Paul. And everybody says that she was outgoing and loyal and just very much the life of a party when she was younger, and had this best attitude. Unfortunately for Crystal, her parents both died within 6 months of each other when she was 11.
I can't imagine.
And like horrific. Her whole childhood, she had kind of lived off and on with different family members up until the point that when she was 11. But her parents, unfortunately, had an addiction to some drugs. And from the DA on Crystal's case, she said that her parents had contracted AIDS from their drug use. And I haven't been able to confirm that with like a coroner's report or anything like that. But I'm assuming if the DA is saying that publicly, that is what happened. But either way, when she was 11 years old, she lost both of her parents. And she went and was living with some grandparents and different family members. But when she was 13, she was abducted by a man, and he held her hostage and kept her in a chicken coop. Unfortunately, as if the kidnapping wasn't bad enough, but she was sexually assaulted, and she escaped and eventually ended up with her grandmother and her aunt. And lots of interviews have been taking place since Crystal's death, and all the family members say that even though her childhood was pretty horrific in the sense of all of these bad things happening to her and just how hard it was, they said that you would have never known that by talking to her, that she wasn't one of those that was like, oh, woe is me, or, oh, I've had a really hard life, They just talk about how caring she was. In fact, they've used the word unapologetically caring.
I love that.
And so she was confident and, anyway, a great friend. And just, anyway, that is a little bit about her. I mean, she was born and raised in Baytown, so she never really left the area.
Oh, okay.
So,
maybe just to pause on that really just for a second there. I can't imagine what it would be like to go through all of those things so close to each other as a child.
yeah.
And she must have been so resilient and just had such a strong, such a strong spirit. So such a tough woman. And by tough, I mean that in a complimentary way. Like, just to have experienced all of that and to still go through her life. You see, and if you look up this case at all, there's so many photos of her, just beautiful smile, eyes lit up with her children and with friends. And man, you can only imagine what that must have been like for her.
Well, and everybody talks about, in every interview I think that we've ever listened to or read, they talk about how she was a friend to everyone, that she didn't meet a person who didn't like her. Like, even the police, when they were doing their interviews, they were like, we couldn't find anybody that actually said they didn't like her.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
I know we always joke about how, people that end up getting killed are the ones that are like, oh, most liked, or
they light up a room.
They light up the room or whatever.
Yeah.
But like in her case, she actually, like, everybody just describes her as that.
Yeah, that's true. And we do now, as she's blossoming into her adulthood, right? One thing she really wants to do and she's very excited about and she gets to do is she becomes a flight attendant.
Yeah, I think in her early 20s.
Yeah, and which is a hospitality job. It's a job of service. And she wanted to travel and she loved doing it. Again, all the sources.
She did it for 15 years.
Yeah.
For ExpressJet Airlines.
Right, which, I mean, I can barely fly and keep it together. I just don't love the experience of, like, getting on a metal tube, locking the door. I can't roll my window down. I'm stuck in a room with 200 strangers. I mean, I
breathing the same air.
Breathing the same air. You're going through the ups and the downs. Anyway, it just takes a special person to not only want to do that for a career, but to be so good at it. And then, we know, of course, because she's one of the topics of our podcast, that then from there she just grew into a very successful real estate agent.
Well, and I didn't know this until we started, like, deep diving research or whatever, but she's a third generation realtor.
Right, she is, yeah.
So she worked at her uncle's agency and or brokerage, or I'm not really sure what word that they were using, but anyway, like, third generation, like, that's amazing in and of itself. That
yeah, it is. And there, I think we've said it before, there is something to say about, in real estate, we really are sales agents. And so there is often a correlation between agents that are very successful at what they do and the personality traits of being charismatic, being likable, being, someone that could be friends with everyone. So that all tracks. That all makes sense.
Yeah. And a lot of people said like she was really great with her clients because she was so personable and so bubbly, and people just liked being around her.
Right. I mean, I can see why. So we do know that Crystal went to live with family when she was younger after her parents had passed away, right? And her cousin that she lived with and then her aunt and her uncle were obviously a big part of her life. And so you actually see a lot of her family members. I don't know that it's them specifically, but you see in different sources that a lot of her family members are here to comment and tell us about her and about her case. But we do know that her uncle that she grew up with, Uncle Jeff, was the one who actually introduced her to her husband. She married a man named Steve McDowell. And her uncle was friends, like Steve McDowell was a childhood friend of her uncle. And so they made the introduction. So that's very fascinating. You're double checking something. Are you double checking?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that her cousin, I'm just not sure in my notes. I mean, her Uncle Jeff we talk about later, but I just didn't know like in her notes if Jeff was Jade's dad. I just have my notes that Jade said her dad grew up with Steve, so I just don't know who Jade is. So we may have been wrong on who the uncle was.
Sure. So Crystal McDowell's cousin is named Jade Cherry, and she does comment a lot on her story she's seen in the Dateline episode. She obviously loved Crystal very much. So you're right. It's her father who was an uncle to Crystal McDowell. We know she had an uncle named Jeff. If that wasn't you, Jeff, we're so sorry.
Yeah.
But, just moving through Crystal's kind of life timeline here, she was introduced by an uncle to the husband that she had named Steve McDowell, and they had 2 beautiful children together.
Yes. They actually met, and then they eventually ended up marrying on April 14th, 2007 in Harris, Texas. And his name, again, is Stephen Wayne McDowell, is the husband.
Okay. So they had a marriage that lasted 10 years, which fast forwards us to 2017. Now, you will see in the telling of Crystal's story, that at different times in their marriage and in their relationship, they were extremely happy, and then it would be tumultuous. And then they were very happy, and there were kind of some ups and downs.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've talked about this off air, I guess, quote unquote. But I think that she's described as adventurous and I think when you're married and it's the same thing every day, you're waking up, you're brushing your teeth, you're saying the same things, you're making breakfast, you're getting the kids ready, like whatever it is, your day becomes very monotonous.
Routine.
Yeah. And that is totally fine. Like a lot of people do that, but it almost seemed like with someone with Crystal's personality, like she was always looking for something different. And so her family kind of describes how within the first year of their marriage, Crystal was like, maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe this isn't who I want to be with. Everyone describes Steve as very nice and attentive, great communicator when they're talking. He's very engaging. But Crystal's personality is so big that he lets her just kind of be the forefront of their relationship, and he just kind of goes along with whatever. And I think she ended up like not wanting that in a partner, maybe.
Sure.
And maybe wanting someone that was more her similar personality style or just go-getting. Anyway, but yeah, their relationship, but despite even the year, like she didn't end up filing for divorce.
Right.
No, they ended up having 2 kids together. They had a girl and a boy. So.
Right. So they remained married all the way until 2017 when Crystal did file for divorce. And we do know that at that time, she was preparing another home for her. However, the remodel was taking longer than expected, which, as I can attest, and so can you, Amy, they always do.
Yeah, so her and Steve shared this townhome in Baytown. She got the townhome in the divorce. And then she was researching schools and different things because her kids were getting older and she wanted to be in a really good school district for them. And she ended up helping Steve purchase a home that he could have the kids in and kind of have them be in a good school. But her house was being remodeled.
Okay. So they're in this kind of in-between phase. And they decide that for the time being, while their lives are separating, which I think this is a very common concern for people who have children that are divorcing, that it would just be best for them to stay living together, to remain living together until the remodel was done so they could both be there for their kids.
Well, and when you're having like this amicable divorce, I've only seen like horrific divorces, really, like from family and whatever, but I do have some friends that have divorced that have remained very amicable with their spouse for the kids. And I mean, we can all think of celebrity couples too that vacation together, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, Demi Moore, Bruce Willis is a great example of them being there for each other and their kids and whatever. And so I think that is kind of a dream for people that don't necessarily want to stay together as romantic partners, but can still want to be and show up for the kids. And since Crystal was more of the breadwinner in their relationship, I think it was great for her to, like, the idea of it, like, if it's so amicable and I can stay with you while my townhouse is being remodeled because you feel like you're in a war zone when you're undergoing a remodel anyway, so to be removed from that. But it gave her extra time with the kids that she wouldn't have had if she wasn't under the same roof.
And I'm sure, like, looking back on that, you know, she, wherever she is now, you know, whatever your personal belief in it, once people pass on, that she must be so grateful for that extra time that she got with her kids. So, but what we do know is that even though it was amicable in some ways and kind of on the surface, that there was still some underlying, you know, kind of viciousness and some fighting and stuff, which we could talk about a little bit later. But, you know, Steve was very unhappy with the divorce, like the fact that the divorce was happening. He wanted to remain married. He was still in love with Crystal, and he was just not happy that she was ready to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, in all of our relationships, I mean, exes, whether they were husbands or boyfriends or whatever, I mean, they're an ex for a reason. Like, I don't envision a scenario where I would be staying with an ex in the same house. But
I mean, yeah,
to each their own.
I understand what you're saying. I definitely, I see it as, you know, having been divorced myself and sharing custody of my son, which I, you know, I'm so grateful that I have my son, regardless of how difficult that divorce was, of course. But I appreciate that there are people out there that can, you know, make it work that way and be able to both be there for their kids. So, but I mean, to your point, they're exes for a reason. And we know that Steve was not happy about that marriage ending.
Yeah. And we've had friends that the family house is where the kids live. And when they have custody, they each go and stay at the house for the week that they have custody. So their kids never move.
Yeah.
They're same area.
Yeah.
But they're never there together. And then they each have their own, the mom and the dad each have their own places somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so, like, I can see that working. I don't know. I'd like to hear from our audience. Like, how do you feel about, you know, would you live with your ex? Would you not? Could you?
I mean, yeah, I'd love to know too. And of course, we're telling this story about Crystal and Steve specifically. So they are, you know, a husband and wife partnership. that chose to divorce, but family structures come in all different types and in all different, forms. And so perhaps it's different for other people. But this story, they were kind of what you would call like a traditional husband-wife family structure, 2 kids, kind of like, your average American family that then divorces and moves on. But families come in all shapes and sizes, as we know. And so maybe that for some people it's easier. Families are all different. We're all fascinated by this subject, but it is interesting. And really the reason why, I guess, Amy and I are talking about it in depth kind of because it honestly played probably the biggest role in the fact that Crystal lost her life. So, which of course we'll get to that part later. But right around this timing, one of the stories that the family does tell that was a pretty big topic of a fight between Crystal and Steve currently was that Crystal was dating a new man by the name of Paul Hargrave. And we'll talk about Paul in just a second, but Crystal was ready to introduce Paul to their children, and Crystal at least had booked a cruise, a vacation for her and her kids to go on a little bit earlier on. And so she had originally actually invited Steve to go with them as a family experience. Again, not as a couple, but as a family experience. And then things weren't going well. I'm sure Crystal was feeling, kind of the weight of that and feeling some stress and pressure, completely understandable. And she actually made a decision. She wanted to invite Paul on that cruise vacation instead of Steve. So she invited Paul and uninvited Steve. And so this was a very hot topic and was creating a lot of difficulty in the relationship at the time that Crystal disappeared.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. They were trying to live together during the remodel, make sure their kids had a stable home, go on vacation together, but it wasn't quite working. And then a new man is introduced, and all of this is kind of ramping up to a lot of frustration in Steve.
Well, and Paul, honestly, like when she initially told him he was going to come on the cruise, he was like, and your ex is going to be there? He's like, no, it can't be both of us. Like, it's got
right. It was one or the other.
And so he kind of pushed her, hand a little bit as far as like, you've got to make a decision.
Sure. Okay. So we know that there's all of this difficulty going back and forth in their marriage. And now we're leading up to the week of August, let's say like 23rd, 24th, 25th. We're leading up to that week where people are prepping for the storm and this massive hurricane is coming in. And so here we're going to kind of start to get into the nitty gritty of the fine details of the timeline of Crystal's disappearance. So let's start actually on August 24th. Amy, why don't you tell us about August 24th?
Yeah. So in the community, as we've seen on the news with the communities that are prepping, authorities are telling people, in evacuation zones to leave, or, everybody's getting supplies and they're getting ready to hunker down. So in Crystal's area, where she's at, they have chosen to hunker down. And so on the 24th, she comes home, and I think Steve thought, as he's in the backyard playing with the kids, like, okay, we're all going to be hunkered down together and kind of going through Hurricane Harvey.
Yeah, because they do have text messages actually going back and forth between Steve and Crystal, talking about making sure there's enough water in the house, that kind of thing. So that was the general idea.
Yeah. So she gets home, and he's thinking, this is the plan.
I get a few days with Crystal.
Yeah. With, our family, maybe we can, reconnect or, whatever. Or just live together as, with our kids. So, but Crystal comes home and she says, actually, I have different plans. I have a date tonight. And she ends up going to a restaurant with Paul, and they go to a nice restaurant and they go out for the evening. And then that night, she decides to spend the night at Paul's house. And so video surveillance shows her roughly at 7 a.m. in the morning. Paul says he's in the shower But his security camera catches her going across the living room and then out to the driveway where her black Mercedes is parked. And it shows her getting into her car. And the timestamp is actually at 7:09. And so it shows her getting into her car and driving away. And that's really the last time that Crystal is seen on camera alive. And we know from like the storm and the information that we have that Hurricane Harvey makes landfall on that evening of the 25th at around 10 p.m. in the Baytown area.
Right. So the 24th of August, when she comes home and lets let Steve know that her plans have changed. The 24th is like the calm before the storm, if you will, right? So they're going to go out and have a dinner date, have probably like one more night of kind of normality before a few days of chaos. Then the morning of the 25th, she's seen leaving Paul's home, and which we'll talk about why we see that footage a little bit later. But and then that evening, the day of the 25th, the storm is coming in.
Yeah.
But Crystal's family actually has plans to get together that evening, and they're going to watch a really big fighting match that's on TV that night. And it's actually the Mayweather-McGregor fight, which if you're a fan at all of boxing or UFC or both, that was a memorable fight. So my point being, it was a big deal because her family likes to get together and watch these types of events, and Crystal doesn't show up.
Yeah. She has, during the day, the family had texted her. There's text messages back and forth from her and Steve earlier in the day asking if she needs to stop at the store before she gets home to pick up more water or whatever. But mostly her text messages go unanswered to the family on the day of the 25th.
Right. And so they're starting to get concerned, but they're trying to just, they're all trying to comfort each other, kind of like, well, she's busy and she has work and she has the kids and she might be prepping and, it's weird that she didn't show up, but nobody panic yet. It's kind of odd. And really, if you think about it, Amy, okay, you and I are very, very good friends. We're not family, but maybe even a day, sometimes 2 goes by, maybe max, but 2 days go by. And one of us will text the other person and be like, proof of life. Yeah. So it makes sense. They were kind of like, okay, let's just give it a minute. It's very odd that she didn't show up to the family plans, that she's not answering anyone. But then again, a big hurricane is rolling in.
Yeah.
So the next day, which would be the 26th of August, still, she's not responding to anyone. Crystal's radio silent. And now her family is, okay, high alert. We need to call the police. And they contact them to file a missing persons report.
Yeah, it's actually her Uncle Jeff, who is in the real estate office with her, that ends up calling and reporting her missing.
Right. So, and one thing that I'm fascinated by with this particular case is how quickly and well law enforcement was actually able to respond despite the fact that a natural disaster was going on.
I mean, this is amazing for the level, and they always talk about how they were hindered, but their response and everything for especially being so distracted. As a police force, I think it would be easy to be like, okay, we'll get to that later, because right now we're dealing with this hurricane that's coming and stalling, and I don't know.
Yeah.
But they every interview and every thing that we've read, the police were just phenomenal in this case.
Yeah, and there's definitely something to be said. I'll just mention this very briefly, but it was very interesting, like I said, for me to watch that, and you noticed it too. There is, of course, a large discussion in the true crime realm about how some cases get more attention faster and get more resources than others, primarily based on, resources. By that, I mean the person who's missing, like their personal resources. And Crystal was a very beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed white woman. I'm mentioning this because it is a common discussion that's out there right now.
Yeah.
And
she was actually 5'4", weighed 120 pounds, long blonde hair, hazel eyes.
Yeah, in her late 30s. And so this case did receive attention. that surely there were other people who were in need and who were missing that day as well. And of course, I hope that everyone got the attention that they deserved. But in this case, if you research it or you've heard it before, you will see the same thing that we did, that there was an immediate police response.
Yeah.
So, of course, as the search begins for a missing person, who's the first people they have to talk to? Her family, of course, right?
Yeah.
And she lives still with her ex-husband, which, police are immediately going to find to be unusual, but not the point right now. We just have to figure out what's going on, right?
Yeah. Have you seen her?
Yes. And so they go and they contact Steve immediately, who Steve was not the one that reported her missing. So Steve's telling the police officers pretty quickly, like, I didn't know she was missing. The storm's coming up. Like, what are you talking about? And he informs the police that Crystal has a boyfriend named Paul Hargrave, who is actually well-known in Baytown because he's a jeweler. So he has a pretty well-known business. And so police are like, okay, we got to go talk to the boyfriend too. We have a missing woman with children. Ex-husband hasn't seen her even though she's living here. We got to go talk to the boyfriend. So they go speak to the boyfriend right away. They talk to Paul and he says, no, I haven't spoken to her since yesterday. She was here, but she left early in the morning and I can prove it to you. So very quickly in the police response, they have an ex-husband and a current boyfriend, a woman caught between the two, and police now know we have two very viable suspects.
And a hurricane.
And a hurricane coming in. So there's a huge need for immediate and drastic response. Because if Crystal is alive, where is she? Why hasn't she been in contact with anyone? Can we find her? Like at this point, they don't know it's too late, right?
Yeah.
Let's just say it like that.
Yeah.
So police have two very good suspects. They actually, I'll just give you this little cliffhanger really quick, and we'll wrap part one up. But the police are interviewing both of these men, and they find Paul to be a little quirky, like to be kind of avoiding, and he doesn't seem forthcoming necessarily, even though he has some footage, of Crystal leaving his home alive. But police identify him as being like odd is a word that comes up a lot. And so they ask both men to take a polygraph test. And Amy, do you know what happens with these polygraph tests?
No.
Tell our audience what happens.
Are we telling them this episode or not?
Yeah, just tell them the results of this poly test, because there's something so fascinating about this moment in this case where Crystal's very recently been reported missing. There's two men that are looking like really good suspects, and they're both very willing to submit to a polygraph test.
Yeah.
What happens?
They both fail.
They both fail, and not just fail, but they fail hard.
Yeah.
Right? Like
on the important question.
One detective who pops up in comments a lot in Crystal's case says, like, he failed harder than anyone I've ever seen fail a polygraph. So, Amy, let's wrap it up. Yeah. Let's wrap part one up on that cliffhanger. And part two, we'll get into the timeline, the nitty-gritty details of the next 10, 12 days, all the footage we're about to come across, and let's tell our audience who was involved in Crystal McDowell's death. Yeah. All right? Wrap it up. Talk to you later.